Hello, everybody. Here we have a collection of some scary stories that you will enjoy. So lay back, get comfy, and just listen. Bashandu. The Whispering Woods. Park Ranger. Elias Carter had always found peace in the deep wilderness of Black Hollow National Park. The towering pines, the crisp mountain air, and the rhythmic sounds of nature made every patrol feel like a privilege rather than a duty. But tonight, something was wrong. The radio in his hand crackled with static as he tried to reach the ranger station. "Dispatch, this is Carter. I seem to be having some interference on my way back. Do you copy?" Silence. Only the hiss of dead air greeted him. He sighed, adjusting the strap of his backpack. The sun had long since set, and the vast forest had become a black void, save for the dim beam of his flashlight cutting through the dark. Elias had been on a routine patrol, ensuring campers were abiding by park regulations, when an odd call came in. An unregistered distress beacon had been detected deep within the northern woods, an area rarely traveled. He had gone to investigate but found nothing. Now, as he tried to return, the paths seemed unfamiliar. Wrong. Elias had walked these trails for years. He knew every bend, every fallen log, yet now the trees seemed closer, the air heavier. The distant hoot of an owl felt unnatural, almost rehearsed. A cold shiver ran down his spine. Then came the whispering. At first, he thought it was the wind threading through the branches. But no, this was something different. The voices were too rhythmic, too deliberate, like a hushed conversation just beyond his sight. He swung his flashlight in the direction of the sound, illuminating nothing but gnarled bark and underbrush. "Hello?" His voice felt small in the vastness of the forest. A branch snapped behind him. He whirled around, his heart hammering in his chest. The beam of his flashlight caught movement, something shifting between the trees, just out of reach. Elias felt a deep, primal dread, something ancient whispering in the back of his mind, warning him to run. But he was a ranger. He had a job to do. Swallowing hard, he pressed forward, following the flickering trail markers that should have led him back. Yet, the deeper he went, the more lost he felt. The whispers grew louder, coiling around his thoughts like vines. They weren't just sounds anymore. They were words, calling his name. "Elias, come closer." He gritted his teeth, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Was it exhaustion, a trick of the mind? He reached into his pack and fumbled for his compass. When he pulled it out, his stomach turned to ice. The needle spun wildly, erratic and broken. A low growl echoed from the darkness ahead. Elias froze. The sound wasn't from any animal he recognized. It was deep, guttural, hungry. His instinct screamed at him to turn back, but he hesitated. A figure lurked in the trees, just beyond the reach of his light. Tall, misshapen, its limbs too long, its eyes two pinpricks of pale fire. A voice, his own voice, whispered from its shadowed mouth. "Elias, come closer." His breath hitched. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. And yet, every fiber of his being told him that it was. The trees groaned as the figure stepped forward, its twisted form merging with the shadows around it. Elias ran. Branches clawed at his arms as he tore through the underbrush, his boots pounding against the damp earth. He had to get back to the ranger station, back to safety. The whispers chased him, weaving through the trees like smoke. The thing behind him did not run. It glided, effortlessly closing the distance. His flashlight flickered, then died. Darkness swallowed him whole. He fumbled for his radio. "Dispatch! Anyone! Please! I need—" Static erupted from the speaker, followed by a slow, distorted voice. "You shouldn't have come here." Terror gripped him. The voice wasn't from the station. It was from inside the forest. Suddenly, light. A harsh, artificial glow split the darkness as Elias stumbled into a clearing. A fire tower loomed ahead, its beacon cutting through the night like a blade. Safety. Salvation. He sprinted toward it, his muscles screaming in protest. Behind him, the whispers turned to shrieks. He didn't look back. He wouldn't. He couldn't. He hit the tower's metal stairs and scrambled up, his hands slick with sweat. The moment he reached the top, he slammed the hatch shut and locked it. Silence. The world outside the tower was empty, as if nothing had ever chased him at all. Panting, Elias sank to the floor, his hands shaking. His radio crackled again, and this time, a familiar voice came through. "Ranger Carter, we've been trying to reach you. You need to get back. Now." His blood ran cold. He lifted his gaze to the window. Down below, at the base of the tower, something watched him. A shifting shape, its glowing eyes locked onto his. And then, it smiled. The whispers had followed him after all. The Lost Ones Park Ranger. Daniel Holt had always felt at home in the Appalachian wilderness. The endless canopy of trees, the crisp mountain air, the quiet solitude. It all made sense to him in a way civilization never did. But on this night, as he followed a set of human footprints deep into a restricted area of the park, an overwhelming sense of dread began to settle in his chest. It started with a report of missing hikers. A young couple, last seen 2 days ago, had failed to return from their weekend excursion. Their vehicle was still parked at the trailhead, untouched. As the lead ranger, it was Daniel's job to find them. But what troubled him wasn't the missing persons report. It was where the tracks led. This section of the park wasn't just off-limits. It was feared. Old legends spoke of people who had disappeared here, of strange fires seen in the distance at night, of voices calling from the trees. The locals avoided it. Even the veteran rangers never ventured this deep. Daniel's flashlight beam bounced off the damp earth as he crouched to examine the tracks. They were fresh, barefoot impressions in the mud, but not just from the missing hikers. There were others, many others, and they weren't wearing shoes. A rustling sound in the underbrush made him freeze. He slowly reached for his radio. "Station, this is Holt. I think I found something. Requesting—" A metallic snap echoed through the trees. A second later, his radio fizzled to static. His heart pounded. A trap? Number. Something was interfering with the signal. He scanned his surroundings, the flashlight beam catching something in the distance. Something hanging from a low branch. It was a strip of fabric, torn, stained dark with something that wasn't just dirt. He pressed on, stepping cautiously now, ears attuned to the unnatural silence that had settled over the woods. No insects, no wind. Even the owls had gone quiet. And then he saw the fire. A dim, flickering glow danced between the trees, maybe 50 yards ahead. He killed his flashlight and crouched behind a fallen log, peering through the branches. What he saw made his stomach twist into a knot. A group of figures sat around the fire. 7, maybe 8. Their bodies were gaunt, their skin stretched too tight over their bones. They wore rags, their hair matted and greasy, their hands caked with filth. They didn't speak, only made low guttural sounds, occasionally grunting and pointing at something roasting over the fire. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. It was a human leg, charred, the foot still attached. A wave of nausea rose in him. He forced it down. He needed to get out, call for backup, come back with an armed search team. But as he slowly shifted backward, his boot crunched against a brittle twig. The sounds at the fire stopped. Every single head snapped in his direction. For a moment, there was silence. Then they moved. Not ran, moved, slipping into the darkness like ghosts, disappearing into the trees without a sound. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to run, but his training kept him frozen. They were hunters, predators. Running would only trigger pursuit. He forced himself to take slow, measured steps back the way he had come. Then he heard it, a whisper, just behind him. Stay. The breath on his neck was hot, rancid. He spun, flashlight flaring back to life, and saw nothing. Panic surged through him now. He turned, walking faster, trying to retrace his steps. But the woods had changed. The trees loomed closer. The path he had come from was gone. The light of the fire had vanished. And then, from all around him, the whispers started. Stay, stay, stay. The voices were wrong. They layered over each other, overlapping, growing more desperate. He broke. He ran. Branches slashed at his face. The ground shifted beneath his boots, the undergrowth grabbing at his legs. Shadows darted between the trees, keeping pace, silent figures just at the edge of his vision. The whispers turned to laughter, low, guttural chuckles that came from everywhere and nowhere. His lungs burned, his legs screamed. Then, just ahead, a glint of metal. His truck. He sprinted for it, fumbling for the keys at his belt. The laughter rose to a fever pitch as he reached the door, yanking it open and throwing himself inside. Hands shaking, he turned the ignition. The engine roared to life. In the red glow of the taillights, they stood just at the tree line, watching, dozens of them now, grinning, teeth too sharp, eyes too hollow. One of them raised a hand. Dangling from his fingers was a torn strip of fabric. Daniel slammed the truck into reverse, tires spinning in the dirt. He didn't stop, not until he reached the ranger station miles away, doors locked, lights on, radio crackling back to life. The search party went out at dawn. They found the remains of a fire, bones scattered in the ash, but no sign of the missing hikers, no sign of footprints, no sign of the people he had seen. When he handed in his resignation a week later, the station chief didn't ask why. He just nodded, understanding in his tired eyes. Because the truth was, Daniel Holt hadn't just seen them, he had been hunted by them, and he knew that deep in the Appalachian woods, beyond the trails, beyond the maps, they were still waiting. But it didn't end there. Late at night, long after he had left his job behind, he would wake to the sound of tapping against his window. The first time it happened, he brushed it off as tree branches in the wind. The second time, he saw the shadows standing just beyond the glass. The third time, he heard the whisper. Stay. He left town the next morning, driving until the mountains disappeared in his rearview mirror, but even then he knew they would never stop watching. Into the pines, I've worked these mountains for over 15 years, seen my share of odd things, strange lights in the woods, voices where there shouldn't be any, tracks that don't match any known animal. But nothing, and I mean nothing, comes close to what happened that night in late October. It started with a routine check. A group of campers had set up off-trail, which is against park regulations. Normally, I'd issue a warning, maybe a fine, and be on my way. But when I reached their campsite, there was no one there. Just a smoldering fire, backpacks left open, and half-eaten food still sitting on logs. It was like they had left in a hurry. I called out, shining my flashlight through the trees. No answer. The wind had picked up, and with it came an awful stench, like wet dog and rotting meat. My first thought was a bear, maybe even a cat, that had wandered too far south. But the thing about predators is, they don't just leave food behind. Something cracked in the brush to my right. I turned, shining my light into the blackness. The trees stretched tall, unmoving, but the feeling that something was out there watching me was overwhelming. My skin prickled. I called out again. Park ranger, if you need help, call out. Silence, and then something huge moved between the trees. Not a quick scurry like a deer, not the cautious prowl of a predator. Heavy, deliberate, powerful. My breath hitched. The thing was moving just beyond the reach of my flashlight, circling. The campers. Where the hell were they? I took a step back toward the abandoned site, reaching for my radio. Static. The damn thing was on, but all I got was a low hum, like interference. That's when I heard it. A deep, guttural whoop, low, vibrating. It echoed through the trees, followed by a second from farther away. Then another, closer this time. My stomach turned to ice. I've heard every animal in these mountains. Bears grunt and huff, bobcats scream like the damned. But this was different. This was something speaking. A branch snapped, loud, like something had just crushed it underfoot. I swung my light to the source and froze. Eyes. Massive, reflective, staring at me from the darkness. They were too high up for any known predator, at least 7 feet off the ground, wide set, with an intelligence behind them that made my gut twist. I took a slow step back. The moment my boot crunched on the ground, the thing let out a breath, a low, rumbling growl. Then it charged. I didn't think. I ran. Barreling through the underbrush, branches whipping against my face, my boots slipping in the damp earth. Something crashed through the trees behind me fast, faster than a man, faster than any bear I'd ever seen. My lungs burned. The scent of decay filled my nostrils, growing stronger. I reached the trail, practically throwing myself onto the dirt path. My truck was 100 yards away. The thing behind me skidded to a stop just beyond the tree line. I could feel it watching, hidden in the black. It didn't follow. I don't remember unlocking the door. I don't remember starting the engine. But the next thing I knew, I was speeding down the gravel road, my hands shaking, my heartbeat slamming against my ribs. The next morning, a search team went out. We found the campers' gear, but no sign of them. No tracks leading away. Just their tents, their food, and the surrounding trees. Stripped of bark, claw marks gouged deep into the wood. Official report said, missing persons, unresolved. But I know better. I've worked these mountains for years, and I'm telling you, something's out there, and it's watching. It's been weeks now, but I can't shake the feeling that I got away by chance, not skill. Every time I step outside at night, I feel those eyes on me again. I've started waking up to strange noises outside my cabin, soft thuds, distant whoops carried on the wind. I've checked my property line more than once, and each time, I find something new. Deep prints in the mud, a foul stench lingering in the air. Once, a freshly broken tree limb, too thick for any man to snap. I even set up a trail cam, but the memory card was wiped blank except for one frame, a black shape, too large to be a bear, standing just at the edge of the light. I should leave, transfer somewhere else. But I know deep down it wouldn't matter, because whatever's out there, it knows me now. It was a quiet afternoon in Yellowstone, the kind of stillness that made you feel like the world was holding its breath. I was on routine patrol, checking the backcountry trailheads, when my radio crackled to life. It was a request to investigate a missing campers report near the Lamar Valley. No big deal, I thought. Campers wander off sometimes, or lose track of time. But as I made my way down the narrow path, something felt wrong. I could smell it before I saw it. Something metallic, mingling with the scent of pine and earth, blood. At first, I thought it might be an animal. Maybe a bison had gotten too close to a camp. But as I rounded a bend in the trail, the sight that greeted me made my stomach drop. Two bodies, half-eaten, were sprawled at the edge of a small clearing, the remains so badly mangled that it was hard to tell who they had been. One of them still clutched a half-burned flashlight in his hand, the faintest light flickering against the growing darkness. The other... There was no mistaking the look of fear frozen in her face. Her eyes were wide open, staring at something unseen, her mouth twisted into an expression I'll never forget. I crouched down, my heart pounding in my chest. There were no obvious signs of animal tracks, no claw marks, no bites. But something in my gut told me this wasn't an accident. There was something unnatural about it. I radioed in for backup, but as I did, I heard something else, a rustling in the brush just beyond the clearing. I stood slowly, hand on my weapon, but nothing emerged. The silence returned. I didn't have a good feeling about being here alone, not with the fading light and the unknown looming in the trees. I took a few steps toward the bodies, scanning the area. That's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. In the dirt, just beside one of the campers' bodies, was a symbol scratched into the ground. It was crude, but unmistakable, a circle with lines drawn through it, like some kind of mark. As I bent closer to inspect it, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. There was a sound now, soft, almost like whispering, but no one else was around. Then, as though some unseen force had been watching me, the wind picked up, carrying with it a faint voice. It was a man's voice, barely a whisper, but it seemed to come from all directions at once. "Get out!" My instincts screamed at me to turn and run, but I couldn't. I needed answers. I stood up, heart racing, scanning the tree line. A shadow moved among the trees, just beyond the clearing, like something watching me. I backed away slowly, eyes never leaving the trees. I didn't turn my back until I reached the safety of my truck, adrenaline surging through my veins. When I finally radioed for the coroner, I was told to stay put and wait for backup. But deep down, I knew. The bodies were only part of the story. Whatever had taken those campers, whatever was out there, still watching, wasn't done yet. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the cabin seemed louder than it should be. Every gust of wind felt like something just beyond my window, listening. I kept replaying the scene in my mind, those eyes, the symbol, and that voice. Yellowstone had always been a place of beauty, but it had its secrets, and some of those secrets were darker than anything I'd ever imagined, and I was beginning to think I wasn't the first to find them. The next morning, I returned to the clearing, the memory of the bodies still haunting every step. The sun was barely up, casting long shadows over the forest. The air felt heavier today, as though the land itself was holding something back, waiting. I wasn't alone this time. A couple of other rangers had arrived, and they kept their distance, eyes darting nervously toward the bodies. I had briefed them on what I found, but none of us seemed to know what to say next. We just stood there, silent and uneasy, as if waiting for something to happen. The bodies had been moved, but the scene still felt wrong. There was no sign of struggle, no broken branches, no sign that the campers had tried to run. Their camp, which had been set up not far from the clearing, was eerily undisturbed, like they had simply vanished. Their food was left out, half-eaten, as if they were interrupted in the middle of a meal. The fire pit was cold, and the tents were untouched, no signs of a hasty retreat. I crouched by the campfire, trying to make sense of it all. The symbol in the dirt, that strange circle with lines, was now gone, as if it had never been there at all. But the feeling remained, an oppressive weight in the air that pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. One of the other rangers, a young guy named James, bent down to examine the ground near where the bodies had been. "What do you think did this?" he asked, voice low and shaky. "I don't know," I muttered, not wanting to admit how much I was starting to fear the answer. But it wasn't an animal. There was a crack in the trees, a branch snapping under the weight of something unseen. James spun around, eyes wide, but there was nothing, just the usual wind, whispering through the branches. I felt it then, the presence. "Did you hear that?" James asked. I nodded slowly, not trusting my voice. It had been the same feeling I'd had last night, the sense of something watching, waiting. Then I noticed something new, something that sent a chill straight down my spine. A figure. It was standing at the edge of the trees, too still to be a person, too dark to be a shadow. I squinted, trying to make it out, but the figure didn't move. It was as if it were made of the trees themselves, blending in so perfectly with the forest that it was almost invisible. I took a step toward it, and then, before I knew it, there was a sound, a guttural growl from deep within the forest, the kind of noise no animal in Yellowstone should make. The figure shifted, almost imperceptibly, like it had noticed me, and with that small movement, the air seemed to crackle, charged with a dark, primal energy. I took a step back. "Get back to the truck now," I ordered, my voice harsh. The others didn't hesitate. They could feel it too, the same sinking, suffocating dread. We ran, not looking back, not daring to question what we'd just seen. It was only when we were back in the truck, doors locked, engine running, that I allowed myself to breathe again. James turned to me, his face pale. "What the hell was that?" I couldn't answer. I didn't know. But I did know one thing. We weren't alone in Yellowstone anymore. Something ancient, something that had been here long before we ever set foot in the park, was awake. And whatever it wasn't ready to let us go. For weeks after, I kept hearing that growl in the back of my mind. I couldn't shake it. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being hunted. And then, one night, I found the report. It was buried in the archives, a forgotten file I had missed before. It detailed another set of campers from decades ago who had gone missing in the same area. Their bodies were never found, but there was something in the report that stopped me cold. A small line, almost like an afterthought. They were last seen near the symbol. I stared at it for what felt like hours, the weight of the words sinking into me. It wasn't just the land that was alive. It was the thing that had always lived here, watching, waiting, and now it was hunting again, and it had already begun. The days bled together, a blur of restless nights and shifting unease. The image of the figure at the edge of the trees haunted my every waking moment. The growl echoed in my mind, gnawing at me like a gnashing tooth. I couldn't shake the thought of the report, those missing campers, the symbol. The pattern was too obvious now. Whatever it was that lived here, in the shadows of Yellowstone, was not just an animal. It was something older, something malevolent, something tied to the land itself. I started digging deeper into the park's history. The archives were filled with whispers, rumors, and strange accounts from rangers past. But one story stood out, buried in a stack of old journals from the early 1900s. A ranger from that time had written about an ancient, forgotten ritual, one involving the land, the trees, and a symbol like the one I'd found in the clearing. The ritual was meant to keep something at bay, something that could not be named. But over time, the ritual was abandoned, and the creatures, whatever they were, began to return. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to convince myself it was just a story, some old legend passed down to scare the new rangers. But the more I read, the more I saw the signs. The campers, the bodies, the symbol. It was all the same. The ritual had been broken, and now whatever had been bound to this land was free again. The phone call came late that night. It was James, his voice shaking. "Ranger, you need to get out here," he said, breathless. "It's back. The figure. It's in the park. And this time, it's not alone." I didn't waste a second. I grabbed my jacket, my flashlight, and my rifle, heading straight to the location he gave me. Lamar Valley, the clearing. As I arrived, the scene was worse than I could have imagined. A group of campers, fresh ones this time, were in the same clearing where I had found the bodies weeks before. But they weren't dead. Not yet. They were surrounded. Not by animals. Not by anything natural. The figure, the dark shape, was there again. But this time, there were others. More figures, shadows that swayed and shifted, as though they were made of the night itself. The growl, low and guttural, rumbled through the forest, vibrating in my bones. The campers were trapped, huddled in their tents, too terrified to run. And those figures, those twisted things circled them, silent, watching. I didn't know what to do. My instincts screamed for me to run, but I couldn't leave them there. I had to protect them somehow. I raised my rifle, my hands shaking. But before I could even take a shot, the ground beneath me rumbled. A roar, far deeper than anything I had ever heard, erupted from the forest. Something massive, something impossibly large was coming. The earth quaked beneath my feet. And then, from the darkened woods, I saw it. A silhouette. Tall, unnaturally tall. Eyes glowing like burning coals, its form shifting like smoke. It stepped into the clearing, and the air grew cold, impossibly cold. A wind howled through the trees, and the figures surrounding the campers scattered, disappearing into the shadows, as if they had never existed. The creature, the thing that had been lurking here for so long, stared directly at me. Its gaze pierced my soul, and in that moment, I knew it was aware of me. It was watching me, waiting. I don't remember exactly what happened next. All I know is that I ran. I ran like I'd never run before, straight to the ranger station, away from the clearing, away from that thing. I heard the campers scream, their voices choked by fear, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't save them. When I got back to the station, breathless and trembling, I tried to radio for help. But the signals were jammed. The land itself was cutting me off, sealing me away from the outside world. And now, here I am, alone. I can hear it out there in the trees, the whispers, the growls, the scratching at the walls of my cabin. The air is thick with it. I'm not sure how much longer I'll last. The creature is getting closer, and it knows I'm here. It knows I saw it. But I also know this. I'm not the first to try and stop it. I won't be the last. Yellowstone isn't just a park. It's a prison. And whatever has been waiting here for centuries is awake again. And this time, it's hungry. Thanks for joining me on tonight's journey into the unknown. If you enjoyed the chills and thrills, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a spine-tingling story. Until next time, keep your lights on. And remember, the darkest tales are the ones that feel too real.